This is the last video for Unit 2 over mixtures and separation. So let's review over what we've covered so far. We've talked about how matter has to have both mass and volume, and it can be classified as either a pure substance, which is something that is a chemical, like an element, or something that is chemically combined, like a compound, or it's going to be something that is physically combined, like a mixture. So we're going to go into more detail about the two types of mixtures in this video. Homogeneous mixtures are something that look the same throughout, and heterogeneous mixtures are something with different layers. So recall from the last few videos that we learned about homogeneous and heterogeneous mixtures. Homogeneous mixtures are something that is thoroughly mixed, meaning they look the same throughout. These are also called solutions. So examples of solutions would be most of our beverages, salt water, sugar water, tea, coffee, Kool-Aid, anything that is thoroughly mixed through would be a solution. Heterogeneous mixtures are something that has different consistencies. They look different throughout. There are actually two types of heterogeneous mixtures. First one is called a colloid. These are medium-sized particles, and so a good example of that would be like a marshmallow, or fog is another good example of a colloid. Remember, it's still a mixture. They're still physically combined. Next example of a heterogeneous mixture is called a suspension. You actually saw a suspension the other day in the lab. It's oobleck. It's cornstarch suspended in water. Another good example of a suspension would be sand water. You mix it up and the sand is temporarily suspended in the water. So the main focus of this video is to discuss how mixtures are actually separated. So recall from the last videos that we talked about how mixtures are physically combined. So that means they can physically be separated. Now there are several different methods. There are 6 that we are going to focus on in this video and in your next lab. Those are going to be evaporation, distillation, and filtration, magnetism, decanting, and chromatography. So let's look at those a little bit closer. So the first example of separation is known as evaporation. This should be a term that you are very familiar with. Evaporation is basically where you separate based on the boiling points. Recall that the boiling point is the temperature at which something will start to boil. So for example, for water, the boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius. So basically what you do is you just boil off the substance with the lower boiling point, and so what you're left with is the substance with the higher boiling point. So here is an image of what evaporation actually looks like. You're not actually changing the substance. The substance is just going from a liquid to a gas state. So that is a physical way to separate two substances. The next one is a distillation. It's basically the same thing as evaporation, but what you do differently is you collect the steam, and so you may evaporate the substances off, but you still end up keeping them by collecting them in special glassware. Okay, so the next two examples are filtration and magnetism. Filtration is a very simple concept. You separate based on size, and so what you can do is you can use a filter paper or a sieve to separate a smaller substance from a larger substance. Usually this involves solids mixed together or solids in a liquid. Okay, the next example is magnetism. Very simple concept as well. You just use a magnet to remove the magnetic substance. So in this image here, you have sand mixed with probably iron or some sort of metal, and the magnet will just remove the metal and leave the sand left over. Okay, so the last two examples are decanting and chromatography. Decanting is basically when you just pour off a liquid and it leaves behind a much heavier substance. So this could be a solid mixed with a liquid, or it could even be two liquids. that are combined together in a solution. One's heavier than another. Last one is chromatography. So this is a little more complex chemistry here. What you have to use is a special type of paper called chromatography paper and a solvent. So you basically place the very bottom of this paper into a solvent, and that solvent will crawl up the paper, and as it does that, it's going to separate the substances based on their molecular masses. So what will happen is the smaller substances will go higher up on the paper, and the heavier substances will be closer towards the bottom. And you can use this in multiple ways. So this one, for example, is separating plant pigments so that we can see the different colors. Okay, so just to summarize the video, we talked about how mixtures are classified. So recall that there are two types: homogeneous and heterogeneous mixtures. All mixtures are physically combined. It's just how they look that classifies them. And the last thing we discussed was how mixtures are separated. We talked about 6 different methods, but all 6 of those methods are all about how you can physically separate mixtures by different ways.